In this hour, I'm going to be speaking to Marisa Jacobs, director at Xpatweb. She's here with me in the studio. We're going to be talking about a conversation that she and I started some months ago that I've been sort of monitoring and watching. And really, it falls within the context of the questions around the tensions that arise out of the immigration debate in South Africa. The issues of the application for visas, and how that is going. The clarity around the fact that South Africa is in need of professionals from other parts of the world, and we need them. In as much as professionals from South Africa are also needed in other parts of the world, and that whole process needs to be regulated through all sorts of legislation. And in our case here in South Africa, that is something that is dealt with by largely the Department of Home Affairs. And for me, it's really a litmus test. It's not just a litmus test, but it is a feeling of the pulse of how we manage the immigration process in South Africa. Because, man, it can get really explosive. I listen to people in the United States and how they have that conversation. I listen to people in the West, in Europe, and how they have that conversation. The issues are largely similar all over the world. But we need to find a sweet spot as to how we deal with the issue of immigration without breaking laws, without messing up the potential of peace and security and the enjoyment of any economy, without keeping people away from opportunities that may be available in our country, and by the same token, opportunities that may be available to us in other countries. We need to understand how that whole process works. Marisa Jacobs, who's here, MD at Xpatweb, joins me. Marisa, thank you very much for coming through. Do you like our studio?
It's lovely.
You've never been here.
I haven't. I always call in, so it's my first time in the studio, and it's thank you for hosting me. It's lovely.
I'm loving the studio. I'm getting people to come here, and then I always ask them that question. It's like, do you like our studios?
Well, I'm on air, so I have to say yes, I guess.
All right, let's talk a little bit about immigration, visas, and all sorts of things. You recently had an engagement with the Department of Home Affairs about issues of visas, work permits, and so forth. In very broad terms, explain to me what is the relationship between yourselves as Xpatweb and the Department of Home Affairs as it pertains to those kinds of documents?
Yeah. So, I mean, we try to at least once a year host some kind of event where the Department of Home Affairs comes through as keynote address, and which our clients generally attend or business attend as corporates. And it's an opportunity for the Department of Home Affairs to engage with business and business to engage with the department direct, where we are not the middleman translating the message. So it's a wonderful opportunity in terms of that, and in that sense it's been very successful to have that engagement. In terms of us as Xpatweb engaging with the department, we've had a very long and successful relationship with the department. We find them to be extremely engaging and extremely helpful. One of the examples are we run an annual critical skills survey, for example, where we try to gather as much information from business as possible around what are the skills that they find most difficult to recruit in South Africa and that they find the need to look for internationally. And that the results of that survey, for example, gets sent through to the Department of Home Affairs, Labour, Higher Education and Training, etc. And that has, over the years, been instrumental in terms of informing the critical skills list. The list was updated last year, and you'll see in the technical report the Xpatweb survey gets quoted. So myself, I serve on NETLAC, which is where legislation gets decided, and I represent business on there. I'm the only service provider that sits on that committee. So I find that the Department of Home Affairs as well as Labour and other departments are extremely engaging. They are looking for feedback from business. They are looking for ways to improve it. we've seen, for example, the presidency getting very involved in recent years, acknowledging that immigration is an area that makes it difficult to do business in South Africa as a multinational or as a foreign investor, and lots of interest from that end, which Mr. Mbele echoed at the event, to say there's lots of input, and they are trying to ease things in the immigration world to be able to compete globally and attract talent.
Who are your clients? Is it international companies that are based in other parts of the world, or is it South African companies that are looking for talent from other parts of the world?
Both.
Okay.
Both, absolutely. So big multinationals that are headquartered abroad and have set up office in South Africa, and who are typically bringing in some of their talent from abroad to get the office set up or to impart some of that culture. And then you'll see, I mean, there's lots of success stories in South Africa where the international talent has almost completely been able to pull out, and it is the business in South Africa is now 100% South African. But you also see other businesses that remain keeping that international flavor and still ongoingly have foreign talent in. And then absolutely we are seeing a lot of South African business that are expanding into Africa, and as they expand into Africa and they have a more international footprint, they are finding more and more the need for international talent to help them to internationalize their business, if you will, as well as just the mere fact that we have skill shortage in South Africa, and South Africa, just like all other countries, are looking beyond their borders to fill those gaps.
And I think that's where the critical conversation needs to be had, about the very idea of immigration, that all countries need talent from other parts of the world, as they may be sending talent to other parts of the world. That is just a reality of life, right?
Absolutely.
But you spoke of the fact that there is a thing called the critical skills list. Talk to me about how that works here in South Africa. What is that, and how is it compiled? What sort of policy framework is used to create a critical skills list?
Perfect. I can speak beautifully to that because I'm very involved, so I'm not guessing.
Right.
So what happens is, so our previous list was published in 2014. So it's been an old list. There's been lots of debate around it to say, come on guys, we need to update this list. There's so many new skills that are needed that aren't on this list. And there's also skills that are on there that just are not used on the list. There was over 200 occupations on the previous list. So in about 2020, the Department of Home Affairs outsourced this to the Department of Higher Education and Training, and said, as a research body, you are in a better position to be able to compile this list. And the Department of Higher Education and Training also every second year release a list of occupations in high demand. So it is something that they are constantly researching. So it got outsourced to them, and some researchers to say, guys, please put together a methodology and let's see what this new list should entail. So they put together a methodology in terms of it needs to be something that falls within the National Development Plan. It needs to be skills that take time to develop. So it's not something that we can reach into the South African economy and say, we need these skills and we can develop them in 12 months. No, it takes time to finish a degree, to gain some experience. So there must be an extended time period to develop the skill. And there's a bunch of criteria that they had set out, and they gathered research and got input from everyone. One of those research points was then our Xpatweb survey, which gave input from business side as an example. So all of this got put together, and then the draft list got published, and Gazette had sent out for public comment. So there was lots of commentary that came in around skills that were left off the list. This was in 2021.
Sure, that was in the middle of COVID, right? COVID
Absolutely.
lockdowns and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So 2021, the list got published, public commentary, lots of input, business, labor, community, everyone gave input, and then NETLAC gets put together, which is then various departments from within government, organised labour, organised community, and then business, BUSA, which I formed part of at that stage. And then everyone debates around this list. We had many meetings, long meetings, around debating what should be on the list and what should not be on the list, and why it shouldn't, and what evidence. There was a very big focus from Department of Home Affairs and Higher Education Training that this needed to be an evidence-based list. If you came to say something shouldn't be on the list, where's your evidence? Why should it not be on the list? And then the list got whittled down to what we then finally saw in last year in 2022. It got published in March. Controversially, healthcare was left off of the list, and then in August, of course, we saw the updated list published, which then included all the healthcare professionals that were initially left off after the additional research had been done. So it is a very well thought through list with lots and lots of input, and I actually saw last week that the Department of Higher Education and Training is again putting together data to see if there's any refreshment needed in terms of the list.
When I look at critical skills list, I am fundamentally looking at a list of occupations that our country needs as per the Department of Home Affairs, Department of Health, Department of Education, and of course, those of you who are in business that have discussed this in a forum such as NEDLAC.
Correct.
So when I look at that list, these are the skills that South Africa needs that take a long time to develop. We need the process of cross-pollination. We need all of those kinds of things to develop those skills in order for our economy to thrive as per the National Development Plan.
Correct.
Okay. And there was some sort of consensus, albeit there were conversations around the healthcare workers' story, and the latest sort of critical skills list has those particular professions or vocations on that list, right?
Correct.
I want to say that we're brilliant at that sort of thing here in South Africa, sitting around, coming up with lists. How is that list policed? Who polices whether or not those people? Because I want to come back to the visa story in a few moments' time. Because who is in charge of policing whether or not the people that are employed from abroad, from other countries on the continent, are those that are on that list?
The Department of Home Affairs, and I promise you they do a very good job of policing it. So when you make application for work, so there's several categories of work visa, but critical skills is one of those categories, and that is where the list comes into effect. So when you are making an application as a business or as an individual to gain a critical skills visa so that you can take up employment in South Africa, you need to prove to the department that you have skills on that list. So that includes your CV. It includes if you have a foreign qualification, you didn't qualify in South Africa, you need to have your qualification vetted by the South African Qualifications Authority, SAQA, which includes them contacting your university to corroborate that you are indeed who you say you are and you did graduate from that university for that degree in that year. So they actually verify it. And then they go through a process of comparison where they say if you had to study these modules in South Africa, you would have gained an NQF level, whatever it might be. And the critical skills list, the latest one that we have now, actually have NQF levels against each occupation on there. So let's say, for example, you were going to come in as a corporate general manager, which is sort of your C-suite executive. You have to have a minimum NQF level qualification, which is verified by SAQA. You then further need to register with a professional body in South Africa that's also recognized by SAQA. That professional body would also evaluate your CV, your references, your qualifications, to decide whether you can have membership of that association. And then lastly, they'll issue you with a letter to say, we confirm that based on the evidence that we have in front of us, we agree that you have this critical skill. So those are some of the criteria that the applicant has to comply with in order to submit an application for critical skills visa. And then the Department of Home Affairs, the official that whose desk that lands on, they would evaluate each of those documents that are submitted and then make a decision to say, yes, I agree, you can get granted a visa, and you must have an offer of employment. You cannot come to South Africa as a critically skilled individual and look for work.
Oh, I see.
You must already have an offer of employment
see.
before you qualify for a work visa.
Wow, okay. That I didn't know. Very interesting. You say that that aspect of the critical skills list is well policed.
Cumbersome, I would say.
Sure, but generally well policed.
Yeah.
To what extent are the jobs that are not on that critical skills list policed, and by whom?
Also very well policed in my view. So there is the other category is an intra-company transfer. So in order to qualify for that, you have to work for a multinational. So let's say working for a big multinational in France, and they pick you up and say, we would like you to come on a secondment in South Africa. And then part of that secondment has to be that you will be upskilling a South African citizen or permanent resident as part of your secondment. It's a maximum of 4 years, and then you have to go back to or move on to another location. You can't stay in South Africa for longer than 4 years. That's on an intra-company transfer. And then they want to see that you are, that you actually possess some kind of skill that a South African can learn something from you. So you have to be in some kind of a senior position to be able to do that. We see that lots of nationals where you need to have an international assignment, for example, to be promoted into a C-suite position because of the nature of a multinational.
What is a C-suite position?
Executive position.
Right.
You must first
So
have
those
some...
are the various categories, I imagine?
Absolutely.
Right,
So
okay.
you must have some kind of international experience to say that you now can progress to a more senior position. So intra-company also well policed because you have to have worked for the entity for at least 6 months. So you can't be a new hire that's been recruited, and you're being seconded for a specific period. So we see that lots of international groups. And then your third category is policed by the Department of Labour, which is your general work visa. You first have to apply to the Department of Labour to say, we've looked for a South African to fill this job. We cannot find a South African. We cannot find someone suitably skilled to fill this position, and therefore we would like to employ Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so. And then the Department of Labour has to sign off on it. So the policing is quite extensive.
Are you saying that the policing is extensive? Or are you saying that the structures for the policing of those issues exist?
Both. The structures exist, and they are, anyone who's applied for work visa will tell you that it is extremely
that's exactly my point.
difficult.
That's precisely my
Yes.
point. If you apply for a visa, but if I don't apply for a visa and I find somebody in South Africa who is rogue, who just employs people without following those protocols, and somebody who's desperate enough to apply without having to go through, and I want to give you some examples.
Yes.
At almost all the various tiers of vocation in South Africa, we had a big story about a bridge that was being built in one of our provinces, where South African engineers were saying, but how come we were not given preference to get this job, and it was given to Chinese engineers, engineering companies and so forth. And South African engineers were incensed at this process. And it turns out that the process didn't go through the mandatory process of how somebody gets to work at that category, at that level in South Africa. During the COVID period, we saw a whole debate around the fact that doctors from Cuba were brought into South Africa for whatever reason. I think they have a slightly different approach to medicine that was seen as necessary by the powers that be, but they didn't follow that process. Many of them stayed. Many of them are still employed, I believe, in some of South African structures, but they didn't follow that process. We had a situation, and that debate continues, where South African professionals are saying, but wait a second. We have all of these structures that are supposed to police the very well thought through policies and the legislation that is supposed to protect the jobs that can be done by South Africans. And we're here. We can do the job. We've got the credentials, but these jobs have gone to professionals from other countries. It's unfair, say South African professionals. And then, the whole story around the trucks that we were discussing, particularly last month, where we saw trucks being burnt and so forth, where truck drivers are saying, but wait a second here. This is not a critical skills. Here we are. We have lists of people that can do this job, and people have not gone through the process that you've just described now of being vetted and then given the permission to employ or be employed in South Africa. So where do you get the idea that this thing is policed effectively?
So I do think the what you're talking about is someone who just simply has not gone through the process, does not have an actual work
Basically
visa,
broken the law.
and has broken the law. And we've seen a couple of highly publicized stories in media over the years where it's a part of the Department of Home Affairs called the Inspectorate, who is responsible to police in terms of the country. So to go to a big multinational, knock on the door, go to the HR's office, look at the payroll and go, these 10 guys on your payroll are international, can I please see their visa copies, and to check that. And we've seen many stories where they've done that and where they've arrested guys, deported guys, fined companies large amounts of money, because that is the if you have offended as a company, you get fined. If you have done so more than once, you will get fined a second time. The third time you get caught, it is imprisonment without the option of a fine. So that would be a line manager, HR manager, CEO that would get arrested if they continue to overstep. And we've seen examples of that actually happens. Again, I do think it's not as well publicized, so you don't hear so much of it. But I do know that
we do hear a lot of the other side of that equation, where people are angry because they feel as though they haven't been taken into consideration for jobs that are supposed to be, I suppose, gotten by South Africans and so forth. I want to ask a fundamental question. Are South Africans correct in expecting that those jobs should be for them? Those jobs that are not on a critical skills list, that they are qualified to do, are they justified in saying, but it is wrong for somebody to be, forget what the law says, but at a sentimental level? Because sometimes I get a little confused as to, is it permissible even for South Africans to say, but surely we should be considered first for these jobs if we are suitably qualified and it is not a critical skill? Just generally speaking, give me a sense, because sometimes I feel sort of almost self-censoring when I say, but surely that job should be afforded a South African if a South African can do the job and it is not in the critical skills. I know what the law says. The law says that it is illegal to do so. But just from I don't know what the right word is, a colloquial point of view, are South Africans justified in feeling that those jobs should be offered them first?
I absolutely think so. And I think especially in a country where our unemployment numbers are so high, I do think that there is an expectation, and I do think rightfully so, for South Africans to go. South Africans should be first in terms of job opportunities. I fully agree with that. I think on the flip side, and that's more the type of work that we see where we are bringing in critically skilled individuals, is research has shown that foreign talent creates jobs for foreign nationals. So I do think that there needs to be a very that there's two conversations to be had. On the one side, bringing in talent is absolutely good for the economy and good for creating jobs. But on the other side, absolutely, where there are opportunities available with locally qualified talent that is not employed, they should get first opportunity.
I want to make it very clear that I'm not looking for a way to excuse violence and criminality. It's very, very important for that to be said, because that can't be tolerated. In as much as we are incensed by the fact that people break the law by employing or seeking employment without going through the right channels, it is as wrong to be involved in criminality that involves violence, the burning of assets and so forth. It is just counterproductive. So it's very, very important for us to underscore that particular reality. It is unacceptable, right? But I'm always arguing, and I get into a lot of trouble for this. Somebody said to me, you must watch yourself. You might have to apply for a job at Pick and Pay. Hey, nothing wrong with working at Pick and Pay. I do want to ask the question again to say that are South Africans justified in saying, in the instance where we as South Africans are suitably qualified for a particular job, and it is not part of the critical skills list, it is wrong for that job to be given to somebody who is not who is not on this critical skills list?
I think so. I would say yes. I would say yes.
Why is it difficult? I'm genuinely looking to be educated on this one, because in my mind it's very clear. In my mind it's unequivocally clear that you give the job to the South African first, without question, if that job is not on the critical skills list. Because we have such a high unemployment rate in South Africa, and we have done the work to produce a critical skills list, and we have protocols and processes that look after people that have the critical skills that we need, because we need them.
Yeah.
In the same way that I would argue that South Africans who go into countries and don't go through the protocols and the process that is required are breaking the law in those countries, and they should face the full might of the law in that situation. So in my mind, it's crystal clear. But more and more, I'm feeling censored. I'm feeling people always saying to me, you can't say that. Why can't I say that? Why? What's going on here? What am I missing?
No, I don't. I think I'm on your side of the fence on this one. The only thing that I can think of where the different mindset can come in is as the world becomes more and more international, and as we are seeing discussions around free trade across Africa and relaxing visa requirements across Africa, being able to say we as an African we should be able to work in across the continent.
Absolutely.
So I think as those conversations get more and more highlighted, that is where the line starts to get blurry as we go. We are becoming a more international
But surely even in that
force.
space, Marisa, there are protocols.
There must be.
Even in the space where we are liberal about, and it's critical we get to that space. It's critical.
Must.
If we want to be part of the global economy, we've just had the BRICS summit. We've got to open up the spaces for easier trade, easier movement. But it obviously must be done within the law, with the right protocols, with the protection of economies, and so forth. Surely that is fair.
Fully agreed. Fully
Okay.
agreed.
All right, let's move on. I want to get to the point now where we are going to be speaking about the fact that even President Cyril Ramaphosa has acknowledged that the fact that we are losing out on certain economic benefits because it's becoming harder and harder because of the red tape. It's harder and harder to operate a business if you're a foreign national company in South Africa because of the red tape. The president is acknowledging that. The president is acknowledging this.
Yes.
You've just had an event where the Department of Home Affairs has acknowledged to the fact that the backlog has increased. The last conversation I had with you, I think we were looking at something like 63,000 visas that were in backlog.
Exactly.
It has now increased to 75,000. But here you are saying to me, but it's getting better. How is it getting better?
It is getting better in the sense that we've seen the announcements from the president. We've seen that they want to make it easier to apply. We've seen some of those regulations coming into effect. So some of the requirements becoming easier, which makes it easier to apply for visas. We have seen at embassies across the world, South African embassies abroad who are adjudicating visa applications, that they have managed to, as embassies catch up with their individual backlogs, and they are getting back to their normal processing times. We are seeing at head office, in terms of the way that we follow our approach as a business on how we put together our visa applications, we are starting to see that new submissions being made at the Department of Home Affairs are being processed quicker. So we are seeing improvements, but they are not across the board. And like you pointed out, it was a point of contention, even at the event where we were presenting, saying we are seeing some improvement. Mr. Mbele came back and said, I'm so glad to hear that, in fact, the numbers show the opposite. It's not improving. So even though you might be seeing specific instances where it's getting quicker, we know day by day we are getting into more and more trouble as the backlog grows.
One thing I can say about the Department of Home Affairs, particularly under the leadership of Aaron Matsoaledi, is that as difficult as it is for them to sometimes acknowledge certain things that they're not doing right, they've been transparent enough to say, listen, we're not doing as well as we could here. We're trying this out. And for that, I think they need to be acknowledged. Because
it's commendable.
I think of all of the government departments that I invite, they're the only people that usually come onto this show. And I think we're going to do something about our relations with the government, bro. You know what I mean? But they do come, right?
They do come. They do come and they talk.
And they talk, and they're very frank, and they accept criticism, and that gives me hope. That gives me hope. It gives me hope to see that the Department of Home Affairs says that we are firing corrupt officials, particularly in countries such as China and Ghana. We've heard recently from the Department of Home Affairs that we've seen how the Department of Home Affairs has caught out people that are involved in smuggling people into South Africa. So we can see the work, and long may it continue, right? But our economy can't afford the pats on the back.
Yes.
As much as we need them. We need to be making some serious economic inroads. And by the president's own admission, the president has said that it is hard to do business in South Africa by companies, legitimate, credible companies that want to come to South Africa because the Department of Home Affairs is not coming to the party, as it were.
Yes.
Well, what are they doing about it?
Let's talk about some of those positive things. So I think there's lots of positive things that are happening. If we can talk about the negative stuff for long, but so one of the things that are being introduced is the Trusted Employer Scheme, which the president announced during his SONA speech. He spoke about it again at his investor conference. This is a scheme that they're looking to bring in where certain employers will be able to, an employer will be able to register if they meet certain criteria, which would mean that some of the larger employers in South Africa who are bringing talent in, they'd be part of that trusted employer scheme. And then for them, it would be that they can have an easing of requirements in terms of the talent that they need to bring in. So the department will place some of the burden on the employer rather than on the department to say you need to vet that this guy meets the criteria, and we will come and audit you from time to time to make sure that you have done it correctly, and we are passing it on to you. That will ease the burden on us in terms of going through all your documentation. You need to take responsibility for employing this person, so it would be expected that you would be vetting to make sure that they are correctly qualified and part of the right professional bodies, and that their CV is truthful and they are who they are. Otherwise, you as a business are going to suffer harm for bringing this guy into your business.
Does government have the capacity to validate? Because I know that there is a lot of fraudulent documents out there. Fraudulent in two ways. Sometimes it's a genuine document that has been illicitly issued.
Yes.
And sometimes it is a flat-out fraudulent document. It's a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. I mean, they caught a guy in Joburg who was running a business making passports, South African passports and IDs. I mean, it's a booming business, right?
Yeah.
Does government have capacity to police that?
So I think that is part of our backlog, is that they are trying their very best to police it. So every single application goes through so much scrutiny to make sure that it is. So we've seen a lot of, like SAQA, for example, now has a QR code on their certificates. So it's easy. It takes you seconds to scan it and check that it's authentic. Professional bodies, we know for a fact that the Department of Home Affairs calls the professional bodies to check that someone indeed is a member of that body, or that body indeed did give them a letter of skills acknowledgement. We know for a fact that the department calls the employer to ask them, did you offer so-and-so a role within your job?
Could that be part of the reason for the backlog?
That's absolutely part of the reason for the backlog, is this extra level of vetting that they do. But what they're saying now with the trusted employer scheme is they're going to pass that on to the employer to say, you need to do this vetting. And it will take way less time to audit you from time to time to make sure that you are doing what you're supposed to be doing than it will take to scrutinize each and every single application that comes across our desk. So that is real improvement.
I like the reason for the backlog. Right? I like the reason for the backlog. I wish that the backlog wasn't there, but I like the fact that there is increased capacity or increased appetite to go the extra mile, because the criminal is counting on the fact that you're not going to go in the extra mile. So you're saying to me that the Department of Home Affairs is a little more diligent in checking the validity of the documents that are given to them.
Absolutely.
Here's a statement that I want you to comment on. Your national identity, your citizenship, is your passport to being economically active in a particular space. And that should be jealously guarded.
So, yes, absolutely. We want South Africans, or let's talk South Africa. We in South Africa, absolutely. You want to have the opportunity to contribute to the economy and to be active in the economy, first and foremost as a South African. But you absolutely want to be able to have access to international talent, to international funding.
Sure. Which is why there are protocols and laws, right?
Absolutely.
So I sometimes feel gaslit, right, in this conversation. And I know that I'm not the only one. I know that there are many South Africans who sometimes feel like they are being gaslit, to use a term of the woke era, right? To say that when I say, wait a second, by virtue of the fact that I'm a South African, I must be preferred. In the same way that companies who are South African say, please buy proudly South African.
Yeah.
And I'm arguing for South African labor and South African skills to say, please, by virtue of our identity that gives us the right to access this economy, that privilege, that right must be guarded jealously. And people who want to participate in this economy, as South Africans who want to participate in other economies, should be clearly vetted. I just feel like sometimes that statement, which is true for everywhere else in the world, seems not to be true for South Africa. Are you experiencing that?
I don't think so. I do think South Africa is very open to supporting South Africans, and perhaps we can do a better job in certain senses. And I do think that media tends to focus on that negative aspect because that is interesting and that fires up conversation and it's news. But if we had to focus on, I mean, there are so many examples of, I used the example earlier where I was speaking about big multinationals who come and set up shop in South Africa, and 5-6 years down the line, they've completely pulled out internationally and are now 100% South African. And I can promise you, those are perhaps on the one side pure intentions from those international businesses, but it's also South Africans who take that opportunity and say,
I think it's a very, very important observation. We too, as South Africans, must take the opportunity.
Absolutely.
011-883-0702 is the number to dial. My guest is Marisa Jacobs. Are you okay?
I'm good.
Lekker, man. 011-883-0702. I'd love to take your calls as we have this conversation. You know where I stand about this matter. You know where I stand. I believe fervently that we must open up our country to talent that comes from other parts of the world. I believe fervently in that. I believe fervently in the idea that we need to guard our economy jealously. And those that want to participate in our economy must follow our laws and protocols. I believe that fervently. I believe, however, that we also have a responsibility to be available to take those opportunities. I believe also that we must also understand that we are in competition. That's why I'm always saying that if we don't learn how to hunt, we will become the hunted. So if you don't learn how to hunt, understand that you are going to be hunted. So it is a multifaceted responsibility from all of us. And I'm glad that Marisa is here to bring some sobriety into the conversation, because indeed, there are certain aspects of the conversation that can be sensationalized and be made hysterical. Politicians love it too. It's all nice. Talk shows too. But we do need to bring that sobriety into the conversation. But as an economy, we are in trouble. And if we don't tighten up on some of these issues, and as you say that, even though the Department of Home Affairs has a backlog that seems to have enlarged to 75,000, it is because they are making the effort to check on those documents as to whether or not they're valid or not. That's very comforting. I want to take some of your calls. 011-883-0702. Would love to hear your thoughts about all of the aspects of the conversation that Marisa and I have been having. I'm hoping that the Department of Home Affairs will agree to talk to us because you've been doing a pretty good job PRing for them. But I'd like to have a conversation with them as well to understand exactly what are the timelines that they are talking about as to when we will not have backlogs.
Yes.
Or is that something that is a pie in the sky?
I think it's becoming something that is vaguer and vaguer and further away. When we heard from the minister last, he said he is anticipating mid 2024, which now is drawing. I mean, that is, what's that, 8-9 months away. And since then we are 10,000 deeper in the red. So I don't think that that's going to happen anytime soon. Mr. Mbele spoke to us about it's really a capacity issue for them. I mean, it's just the sheer volume of applications that come in on a day-to-day basis and how many they can process on a day. And then obviously dealing with the backlogs that's still sitting there. So they really need more resources to be able to work on that. He confirmed that they are getting in more resources for I think he said for a 12-month period, they are upping the amount of adjudicators.
I had a conversation with the minister a couple of months ago when they were going on this campaign to digitize documents, hard copy documents. And I was led to believe that thousands of youngsters were being employed. Somebody just sent me a message, said, no, it's not true, Orbs. Yes, that is what they said, but in real terms, they have not been employing those people. Not for you to answer. But it is a question that I'm asking about the appetite for gaining that capacity that they need. You working closely in that space. Are they doing it?
They have budget constraints, I know. So what they discussed at the event was that the presidency will be giving some support in terms of being able to bring those resources in. And because it is such a national problem, they are taking that on board and they are dropping those resources in, and they are really trying to work on it. It's not something that they know it's a problem and they know that it needs to get fixed, and the longer they ignore it, not that they're ignoring it, but the longer it drags on, the worse it gets.
I want to take one call from James in Johannesburg. Hi, James.
Hello, Aubrey. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, James.
Okay. It seems Marisa has got a good heart as I'm listening. But I just have...
Marisa has what?
A good heart. She's coming from a good heart.
Okay.
Yeah, as she is explaining. But then I have one question. I wanted to find out, does this mean maybe sometimes companies would have to sacrifice a few South Africans, maybe 5, in order to bring in another 5 international to bring knowledge?
Why would they need to sacrifice South Africans?
I'm just asking. I just wanted to find out, because if you ask a question and say, why wouldn't South African be first? And then there is this, as you answer, there is this thing that, but at least we need to have international knowledge, or maybe a certain...
Well, my understanding, James, is that if it's a critical skill, it means that we don't have it. That's why we're going out to go and get it. So no South African is sacrificed.
Yes, normally. Ideally, yes. But if you ask Marisa, and maybe sometimes the answer doesn't come immediate.
Well, let's ask her. Let's ask her. She's still here, and I'm worried about time. You've got a good heart and everything, but are South Africans being sacrificed?
Not in my view, and not what I see. No.
Yeah. As it pertains to critical skills.
Definitely. Yeah? Definitely not. Definitely not.
I think that there's a number of debates layered in this conversation. We as South Africans need to have a very sober conversation about, are we making ourselves available for those opportunities? And not imagine that those opportunities are going to come looking for us. We need to understand that we are in a competitive global reality. That's a conversation we need to have separately as South Africans. But I think that there's the conversation about the critical skills and the policing of that process and the non-policing of the non-process.
Yes.
I think those are the conversations. Will you come back again?
Yes, absolutely.
And
With Home Affairs.
I hope so. I hope they come.
Let's all chat.
I hope so they come. And thank you for bringing sobriety and balance to the conversation. Marisa Jacobs at Xpatweb. How do people get in touch with you?
Exactly like that, Marisa at Xpatweb.com. Otherwise, onto our website, Xpatweb.com, and we'll happily help.
Marisa Jacobs is MD at Xpatweb. Thank you very much for joining us.